So welcome to Slaying with Santos. If you're new here, hola, I am your host, Melissa Santos. Join me as we dive into the dark and twisted minds of criminals, revealing the stories that lurk just beyond the flicker of candlelight. So what if I told you that beneath manicured lawns in a quiet Indiana suburb, thousands of bone fragments whisper the truth about what really happened there? So a property with rolling acres, a pristine mansion, a glittery pool, indoor pool, and a place where laughter once echoed, and now only ghosts remain. Tonight, we pull back the curtain on a home that became a graveyard and a man whose secret life left a trail of the vanished and of the dead. This is the story of Herb Baumeister and Fox Hollow Farm. So before he was a headline and before he was a suspected serial killer, Herb Baumeister was just a boy from Indiana. He was born in 1947, and Herb was the eldest of 4 children in an upper middle class family. His father, Dr. Herb Baumeister Sr., was a respected anesthesiologist. His mother, Elizabeth, was a homemaker. She upheld the family's image with care. The Baumeisters lived in a well-kept neighborhood, sent their kids to good schools, and maintained an active presence in their community. So from the outside, they were the perfect picture of Midwestern respectability. But inside their home, young Herb stood apart. So he was quiet, withdrawn. His behavior sometimes unsettled his classmates and teachers. Those who knew him recalled moments that hinted to maybe something darker beneath the surface. As a teenager, Herb was reportedly diagnosed with schizophrenia. So accounts differ on specifics of it, but it's clear he struggled with disturbing thoughts and he had erratic behavior. He had a fascination with death and he would often be found playing with dead animals. Even once leaving a dead crow on a teacher's desk, like, this is so funny, haha, joke, right? So treatment, if any, was inconsistent, and in a family determined to keep their appearances, his struggles became a carefully guarded secret. So Herb was smart, but socially awkward. He drifted in and out of Indiana University, never finishing. He worked odd jobs here and there at the Indianapolis Star newspaper, later at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, the DMV, where coworkers continued to call him eccentric. They continued to call him strange, sometimes even disturbing. And yet, in 1971, Herb did something no one expected. He got married. In 1971, Herb Baumeister married Juliana, or Julie, as many like to call her. She was a school teacher, super normal, and together they built what looked like a perfect American dream. 3 kids, a nice home. They went on vacations. They even had their own business. In 1988, Herb and Julie opened a Save-A-Lot thrift store, a second-hand shop that quickly expanded into multiple locations. It gave them financial comfort, status. They even brushed shoulders with Indiana politicians at charity events. But behind closed doors, things were not so perfect. So their marriage was described as distant, cold. Friends later said that the couple rarely even shared a bed and intimacy was entirely non-existent. And in later interviews, Julie chalked it all up to stress, and Herb is just so eccentric. This is just the way he is. He had a history of existing in this manner, but Herb was hiding something bigger and much more darker. At night, when Julie was away visiting family or sleeping upstairs, remember, they did not sleep in the same room. They did not share a same bed. Herb would basically slip out into another life. He haunted the gay bars in Indianapolis, but he didn't go by Herb. He introduced himself as Brian Smart, his alter ego, I guess. Brian Smart was charming. He was worldly. He was wealthy. He drove a nice car. He invited men back to his home. And once they were inside Fox Hollow Farm, he often suggested a little swim, a little drink, and then something darker. He would ask if they were into breath play, or some like to call it erotic asphyxiation. Some declined and left and were like, this is weird. And others accepted and didn't make it out alive, unfortunately. And the ones who did stay, they were just overpowered. They were strangled. They were murdered. Let's take a step into the darkest corners of Herb's mind. What forces shaped his killing spree? So first, childhood trauma. mental illness. Herb was reportedly diagnosed with schizophrenia and possibly some sort of antisocial personality disorder, conditions that distort empathy, amplify paranoia, and disrupt moral boundaries. But there's something deeper and far more complex at play. Internalized homophobia. When society stigmatizes queerness, it doesn't just create external targets, it can warp itself. Minority stress theory explains how the LGBTQ plus individuals' pervasive stigma becomes internalized stress. So it erodes mental health, self-esteem, identity. And in Herb's case, he was living in the closet during a time when homosexuality was seen as shameful. Experts say that especially in a conservative community like this, that stigma can turn inward and become internalized homophobia. A subconscious self-hatred is so potent, it leads to someone to maybe despise the very part of themselves they're attracted to. He was attracted to men, but consumed by the rage towards them. So some experts suggest that each victim he strangled was a stand-in for a part of himself he hated the most. I know, it's like insanely deep. And for Herb, the killing may have been a way of destroying something he saw as temptation and a twisted attempt to erase his own urges. That's why murders felt so personal, so ritualized. He wasn't just killing people, he was killing the reflection in the mirror. In 1994, a moment of horror unfolded in the most unexpected way. Herb's 13-year-old son was exploring the wooded area behind their mansion when he stumbled across something that would just later be recognized as the first known discovery connected to the Fox Hollow Farm murders. A human skull. Imagine that, a child holding undeniable evidence of death right in his own backyard. When he showed his father, Herb barely flinched. He told his son and later the police that it was part of a medical skeleton he had bought for educational purposes. The explanation was delivered so casually, so convincingly that authorities accepted it with no further investigation. And just like that, the skull was dismissed and the secrets of Fox Hollow stayed buried. What's even more unsettling is the question that has haunted many and me ever since I heard this story. How did Giuliano not know anything about this, his wife? How could she live in the same house, sleep close to him at night, and not know that he was doing this? She would later claim that Herb's late night disappearances, his frequent business trips, sometimes he said he was on a business trip, and his habit of keeping certain areas on his property, like the pool, off limits to her and the rest of the family didn't raise an alarm. She's not a pool person. Like, how do you just let that just slide by? Anyway, it was the 1990s. I guess people didn't question successful men's privacy the way we might today. Herb clearly controlled the narrative and their world, and the appearances apparently were everything. Wonder where he learned that from. Maybe mom and dad? It would take 2 more years and the courage of witnesses and a survivor before the truth began to surface. Way too long in my opinion, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about the one man who lived to tell the story, Mark Goodyear. In 1993, Mark met a man calling himself Brian Smart at a local gay bar. He mentioned that Brian was charming, confident, and offered him a drink before suggesting they go back to his estate for a late night swim. Once inside Fox Hollow Farm, Mark noticed something strange. Mannequins positioned around the indoor pool as if they were part of the occasion. They were guests just hanging out. I don't know about you guys, but that would have been the moment I left. Mannequins freak me out, period. But I don't feel that maybe someone with random mannequins dressed up and scattered around their house would be particularly someone I would want to hang out with, honestly. So later in the pool area, Brian suggested a form of breath play. When Mark refused, Herb attacked, trying to strangle him. Mark was able to fight back and managed to escape, but that wasn't the end. Weeks later, Mark spotted Brian Smart again, this time in the city, in the wild. He trailed him long enough to get a license plate number and took it straight to the police. That place traced back to Herb Baumeister. It was the golden ticket, a survivor naming his attacker, a direct connection between Herb and the string of missing men. And yet, nothing happened. Police at the time claimed they didn't have enough evidence for a search warrant. So Herb stayed free. He was free to continue to hurt others. This was disgusting and a total disregard to the victims. So time goes by, and in 1996, after Juliana, Herb's wife, finally granted the police permission to search the property, investigators uncovered a grim reality. Over 10,000 human bone fragments scattered across the grounds. The remains of at least dozens of young men. Now they have Herb right where they want him. But before investigators could arrest him, Herb fled to Canada. On July 3rd, 1996, he checked into a park in Ontario and camped there for several days. Then, using a .357 Magnum revolver, he shot himself in the head. In his suicide note, no confession. He blamed stress and personal troubles, even claiming financial pressures, even though records suggest his business was still making money. But he did not confess to the murders. Whether that was an excuse or a glimpse into his unraveling state of mind remains a point of speculation. No trial, no courtroom, no justice, only silence and nameless bones. For decades, the victims remained nameless, stored away, forgotten. What's insane is Mark Goodyear's escape could have been the moment the entire house of cards came crashing down, but detectives let time go by. What more do they need? You have a survivor naming an attacker. You have a license plate tying Brian Smart to Herb Baumeister. I would like to add, this lack of police response wasn't just happening in Indiana. In Milwaukee, Jeffrey Dahmer was killing young gay men, mostly men of color, for years, and police ignored neighbors' pleas for help, even returning one victim to Dahmer's apartment. In Houston, banker Paul Bassard was beaten to death in 1991, and police downplayed the hate crime. And it wasn't until public outrage forced action. And in Toronto's gay village, disappearances went unsolved for decades because the victims were assumed to have left voluntarily. It was the same bias over and over, a deadly combination of homophobia, stigma from the recent AIDS crisis, and the belief that certain lives mattered less. So when Mark Goodyear named Brian Smart in 1993, and when a 13-year-old boy found a human skull in Fox Hollow Farm in 1994, the lack of urgency wasn't just incompetence. It was a reflection of the system that, at the time, didn't see these victims the same way it saw others. And that's why what happened next, the work of Hamilton County Coroner Jeff Jelson, is so absolutely remarkable. In 2022, Jeff reopened the case and launched a public appeal. Families across the country began submitting DNA, and the matches started coming in. So when Jeff stepped into the role, he inherited boxes of evidence, skeletal remains, bone fragments, and unsolved questions that had been collecting dust for decades. Many of the bones have been stored away since the mid-1990s, cataloged but never connected to a name. And check this, families of the missing were told, you'll have to pay for DNA testing yourself. Can you believe that? Insane. And the official files felt cold. They were clinical, almost resigned to the idea that these victims might never be identified. And Jeff refused to accept that. Here's what he said about the heart of the problem. He said, it's in my opinion that the attitude of those involved in the events, in the investigation in the 90s was, this is 8 gay men from Indianapolis. What do we care? So working with advanced forensic technology and genealogical labs, Jeff's office started making matches. One by one, anonymous remains became people again. Sons, brothers, friends. Amongst those identified were Alan Livingston, Manuel Resendez, Daniel Halloran, and Jeffrey Jones. Each identification wasn't just a scientific achievement. It was a phone call to a family that had been living in limbo for decades. But Jeff's work didn't just stop at Fox Hollow Farm. Some DNA submissions didn't match Baumeister's victims, but instead linked to other cold cases. In those moments, Jeff wasn't just a county coroner. He was a lifeline for those families far beyond his jurisdiction. He personally reached out to the relatives, explained the findings, and in many cases gave them the first concrete answer they've ever received. His work has proved that these victims weren't just statistics. They were people who deserved dignity and families who deserved closure. Jeff Gelson is living proof that one determined individual can breathe life back into a forgotten case. He listened to the dead when they spoke, and he made sure their voices reached the people who have been waiting to hear them. But he's not done. Jeff Gelson right now doesn't just see statistics, he sees the tragedy. So now the question is, what happens next? Because the truth is, not all the victims of Fox Hollow Farm have been identified. And that means somewhere out there are still families waiting, still wondering, still aching for answers. So if you have a loved one, a brother, a cousin, or a son who vanished in Indiana in the 1980s or 1990s, especially if they were part of the LGBTQ plus community, you need to contact the Hamilton County Coroner's Office. So Jeff Gelson is still actively working to identify the remaining remains recovered from Fox Hollow Farm. All it takes is a DNA sample, and you could be the missing link that brings back someone home. You can reach his team directly through the official county website, and that is hamiltoncounty.in.gov, or search Hamilton County Coroner's Office, Indiana, for the most up-to-date contact. This case is not over, and with your help, these men may finally rest in peace with their names, with their stories, and with their families. Thank you for listening to this very special episode of Slaying with Santos. I am your host, Melissa Santos. New episodes drop soon. Stream all episodes on Spotify, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. So until next time, stay alert, stay informed, and stay safe.